Have you ever felt like your best days are behind you? Walter Jennings woke at 5:47 a.m., just like he had for 50 years. But unlike those 5 decades when his hands built homes across Portland, Oregon, now they simply existed. He was 72, a widower for 7 years, a father to children who lived states away and called less with each passing month. The house was silent. Too silent, the kind of silence that screams. He shuffled to the kitchen in the same worn slippers Margaret had bought him a decade ago, reheated yesterday's coffee in the microwave, sat in the same rocking chair by the window that overlooked a street he no longer recognized. The television played without sound, just moving images of a world that had moved on without him. Walter Jennings, master carpenter, builder of homes, creator of futures. Now, a ghost haunting his own life. His hands, once steady enough to measure angles to the 16th of an inch, now trembled when they held nothing. The calluses remained, but the purpose? Gone. Every evening, before bed, he performed the same ritual. He stood before the hallway photos. Margaret's smile frozen in time. His children as kids, laughing in a yard he'd built with his own hands. And every night, he whispered the same prayer to the faces that couldn't answer. I'm no good to anyone anymore. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was believing he deserved it. It happened on a Thursday morning in late October, cold enough to see your breath, gray enough to match Walter's mood. 3 sharp knocks. Walter's first thought, wrong house. Nobody knocked on his door. Not anymore. He opened it slowly, his posture curved by years of believing he'd shrunk in every way that mattered. Standing on his porch was a young man, 19, maybe 20. Thin frame swimming in a second-hand jacket. Dark circles under eyes that somehow still held light. Are you Mr. Jennings? The stranger asked, nervous energy in his voice. The carpenter. Walter's jaw tightened. Was. Past tense. Who's asking? My name is Eli Turner. I volunteer at New Beginnings, the shelter on Morrison Street, the one for single mothers and their babies. Walter said nothing, waited for the inevitable pitch, donation request, fundraiser ticket, whatever strangers wanted these days. But Eli surprised him. People told me you were the best carpenter in Portland, that you built things that lasted. Something flickered in Walter's chest, brief, almost painful. That was a long time ago, son. I know this is strange, Eli continued, words tumbling out fast, but we received donated cribs, 12 of them. Old, broken, unsafe. We have babies who need them, but no money to fix them properly. And He stopped, looked directly at Walter. I don't know how to do this alone, and I can't mess it up. There are lives depending on getting this right. The wind picked up. Walter felt the cold in his bones. Why me? Because, Eli said simply, you're the only person anyone recommended. They said if Walter Jennings can't fix it, it can't be fixed. Walter's hands gripped the doorframe. They said if Walter Jennings can't fix it. When was the last time anyone needed what he knew? My hands shake, Walter said, almost defensive. Mine do too, Eli replied. But maybe together, they'll be steady enough. For the first time in years, someone wasn't offering Walter pity. They were offering him purpose. I'll think about it. Eli handed him a business card with the shelter's address. Thank you for considering, Mr. Jennings. Really, thank you. After Eli left, Walter stood in his doorway for 10 minutes, looking at the card, feeling something he'd thought was dead. For 3 days, Walter stared at that card on his kitchen table. What if I can't do it anymore? What if my hands fail? What if I'm just a shadow of who I was? But on Sunday morning, something shifted. He woke early, but not from habit this time, from restlessness. He walked to his garage, a tomb of dust-covered tools, equipment he'd avoided for years because they reminded him of everything he'd lost. He picked up his grandfather's hammer, 34 ounces. Hickory handle worn smooth by 3 generations of Jennings' hands. It felt right, like shaking hands with an old friend who forgave your absence. Monday morning, Walter did something he hadn't done in years. He shaved carefully, put on his good flannel shirt, the blue one Margaret loved, packed his toolbox with surgical precision. The bus ride to Morrison Street took 40 minutes. Every block, doubt whispered, "Turn back. You'll embarrass yourself. You'll fail." But louder than doubt was a question he couldn't ignore. What if I still have something to give? New Beginnings shelter was smaller than he'd imagined. A converted warehouse with hand-painted signs and mismatched furniture. The kind of place held together by hope and determination. Eli met him at the door, surprise and relief flooding his young face. "Mr. Jennings, you came. Said I'd think about it," Walter replied gruffly, hiding the emotion rising in his throat. "Thought about it." Eli led him to a back room where 12 cribs sat in various states of disrepair. Broken slats, loose screws, unstable frames, chipped paint containing God knows what chemicals. Babies would sleep here. Or wouldn't, if Walter couldn't remember how to fix things. He set down his toolbox with a thud that echoed. "Well," Walter said, running his hand along the first crib, "let's see what we're working with." His hands didn't shake when they touched the wood. They remembered. The first crib took Walter 3 hours. Not because he was slow, because he was thorough. Every joint reinforced. Every surface sanded smooth. Every measurement checked twice. The muscle memory of 50 years returning like breathing. Eli watched, fascinated, as Walter worked. "Why are you sanding that part?" Eli asked. "No one will see it." Walter paused, looked at the young man. "A baby's hand will touch it. That's enough reason to make it perfect." It was the kind of wisdom Walter thought had died with his relevance. But here, in this moment, someone was listening. "Can you teach me?" Eli asked quietly. Walter felt something crack open in his chest. "Hand me that clamp," he said, instead of answering directly. But his voice was softer. Over the following weeks, a routine emerged. Walter arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. Eli cleared his volunteer schedule to be there. Together, they transformed broken furniture into safe havens. Eli learned to measure twice, cut once, to feel the grain of wood before applying stain. To understand that craftsmanship isn't about speed. It's about respect for what you're creating and who will use it. Walter learned something too. That teaching might be the highest form of building. "Why do you do this?" Walter asked one afternoon, sanding a spindle to impossible smoothness. "Volunteer at a shelter. You're young. You could be anywhere." Eli was quiet for a moment. "My mom raised me alone. We lived in places like this, sometimes worse. I remember cribs that weren't safe, beds that collapsed, feeling like we weren't worth anything better." He looked up at Walter. "I volunteer because I remember what it felt like to sleep somewhere that someone actually cared about. I want other kids to feel that too." Walter set down his sandpaper, saw himself in this boy. Different generation, same soul. "That's a good reason," Walter said, voice thick. "What's yours?" Eli asked. "Why did you really come?" Walter hadn't expected the question. He stopped, started again. "I forgot what it felt like to be needed, to have hands that could help instead of just shake." "Your hands don't shake when you're working," Eli observed. Walter looked down at his steady grip on the wood. "He's right." "Huh," Walter said, almost laughing. "I guess they don't." By the sixth crib, something had shifted in Walter. He started arriving earlier, staying later, humming old songs Margaret used to play on the radio. He wore his good clothes every day now. Not for anyone else, for himself. Because he was Walter Jennings again. Master carpenter. Builder of futures. They were finishing the 11th crib when it happened. A Tuesday afternoon. Rain hammering the shelter's tin roof. Walter was securing the final corner joint, the most critical connection point. The one that would bear the full weight of a sleeping child. He tightened the screw with practiced precision. Then, his vision blurred. The room tilted, his chest clamped tight, a vice made of panic and pain. The screwdriver clattered to the concrete floor. "Mr. Jennings!" Eli's voice seemed to come from underwater. Walter grabbed the workbench, knuckles white, breath coming in sharp gasps. "Not now, not here, not when I finally—" Eli rushed over, hands hovering, uncertain. "I'm calling 911!" "No!" Walter managed, voice strained. Just give me a minute." But it wasn't just physical pain. It was the flood of every fear he'd suppressed. "This is it. This is your body telling you what you already knew. You're done. Finished. Used up." He slid to the floor, back against the workbench, hand pressed to his chest. Eli knelt beside him, terrified but trying to be calm. "Breathe, Mr. Jennings. Just breathe." After what felt like eternity, the pain began to ease. The room stopped spinning. But the shame remained. "I'm sorry," Walter whispered, staring at the unfinished crib. I'm no good anymore. Can't even finish what I started." His voice broke. "You shouldn't waste your time on an old man who can't even—" "Stop." Eli's voice was firm, firmer than Walter had ever heard it. The young man sat beside him on the cold floor. "Mr. Jennings, do you know what I was before I met you?" Walter shook his head. "Lost. Completely lost. I was volunteering because I didn't know what else to do with my life. Floating. Purposeless. Watching everyone else seem to have direction while I had nothing." Eli looked at the cribs surrounding them. "Then I met you, and I watched you turn broken things into something beautiful. I watched you treat every piece of wood like it mattered. Like the babies who would use these cribs were worth your best work." He turned to face Walter directly. "You didn't just teach me carpentry. You taught me that skill and care and dedication still mean something. That one person, doing one thing well, can change lives." Eli's voice grew intense. "You think you're not valuable? You think you're wasting my time? Mr. Jennings, you're not helping me fix cribs. You're helping me believe I can be someone who makes a difference. Someone who matters." Tears tracked down Walter's weathered face. "If that's not value," Eli said softly, "then I don't know what is." They sat in silence, rain drumming overhead. Two men, two generations, both believing they weren't enough, both wrong. Finally, Walter spoke, voice hoarse but steady. "Hand me that screwdriver." "Mr. Jennings, you should rest." "Hand me the screwdriver, Eli." The young man did. Walter pulled himself up, joints protesting, pride refusing to bend. He picked up where he'd left off and finished the most beautiful corner joint he'd ever made. 2 weeks later, New Beginnings Shelter held a small celebration. Walter had resisted attending. "I just fixed some furniture. That's all." But Eli had insisted, almost begged. So Walter found himself standing awkwardly in the shelter's common room, surrounded by mothers holding babies, volunteers setting up donated food, children running between chairs. Life everywhere. messy and beautiful and real. The shelter director, a woman named Rosa with kind eyes and battle-worn determination, approached him. "Mr. Jennings, I wanted to thank you personally." Walter shifted uncomfortably. "Just did what anyone could." "No." Rosa cut him off, gently but firmly. "Not anyone. We tried. We had 3 different handymen look at those cribs. All said they weren't worth saving, that we should just throw them out and start over." She gestured to the room where 12 perfect cribs now stood. "But you didn't see trash. You saw possibility." A young mother approached, a tiny infant swaddled in her arms. "Are you the carpenter?" she asked shyly. Walter nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "My daughter sleeps in the crib with the carved flowers on the headboard." Her eyes filled. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned. The first time in my life I've put my baby to bed somewhere that felt safe, permanent, like we mattered." She shifted the baby, touched Walter's arm. "Thank you. Thank you for caring enough to make it perfect." The baby gurgled, reached a tiny hand toward Walter's weathered finger. He let her grasp it, and in that moment, that single, perfect moment, Walter understood. Purpose doesn't expire. It transforms. He'd spent years believing his value died when his body slowed, when his wife passed, when his children grew distant, and his tools gathered dust. But he'd been measuring worth with the wrong ruler. Worth isn't about strength or speed or even presence. It's about what you leave behind when you walk away. These 12 cribs would hold 12 lives safely through countless nights, would be used by dozens of babies over years, would represent the difference between danger and security. All because one old carpenter remembered how to care. "Mr. Jennings?" Eli's voice pulled him back. The young man stood nearby, confident in a way he hadn't been months ago. "I have an idea," Eli said, excitement barely contained. "What if we did this for other shelters? What if we taught other volunteers? Created a whole program?" Walter stared at him. "You want to do more?" "I want to do everything," Eli replied. "But I can't do it without you. You handle the craftsmanship. I'll handle the logistics. We'll call it—" He paused, smiled. "The Jennings Foundation." Walter's throat tightened. "I'm 72 years old." "So?" Eli challenged. "That just means you have 72 years of wisdom to share." Around them, life hummed. Babies cooed, mothers laughed, volunteers connected, all held together by care made tangible. Walter looked at his hands, still trembling slightly, still scarred and age-spotted and imperfect, but steady when they held tools, steady when they mattered. "Okay," he said quietly, then louder. "Okay, but we start tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp." Eli's grin could have lit the whole city. 6 months later, Walter woke at 5:47 a.m., just like always. But everything was different. He made fresh coffee, put on his good blue flannel, packed his toolbox with the care of a surgeon preparing instruments. And he smiled. The Jennings Foundation operated out of a small workspace donated by a local church. 2 days a week, Walter taught basic carpentry to volunteers. 3 days a week, he and Eli traveled to shelters across Oregon, assessing furniture, training staff, building safety. His children had started calling again, confused at first by the energy in his voice. The stories that spilled out about babies and cribs, and a young man named Eli who'd knocked on his door. His daughter visited last month, brought his grandchildren, watched him work. "Dad," she'd said, tears in her eyes, "I haven't seen you this alive since Mom." She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Margaret would have loved this, would have laughed and said, "Took you long enough, Walter Jennings? Took you long enough to stop mourning and start building again." On this particular morning, Walter arrived at the workshop to find Eli already there, reviewing plans for their next project, renovating an entire children's wing at a women's shelter in Eugene. "You're early," Walter observed. "Learned from the best," Eli replied. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from shared purpose. At lunch, sitting on sawdust-covered stools, Eli asked the question Walter had been waiting for. "Do you ever miss the quiet before all this?" Walter thought about it. Really thought. "I thought I wanted peace," he said finally. "Turns out I just wanted to matter again." He looked at the young man who'd knocked on his door and changed everything. "You gave me that, you know. You gave me a reason to remember who I was." "No," Eli corrected gently. "I just reminded you that who you were never left. It was just waiting for the right moment to come back." That afternoon, they finished a rocking chair for a pregnant teenager who'd aged out of foster care. As Walter tested the stability, Eli carved something into the underside of the seat, a place only future repairmen would see. "Built with care by the Jennings Foundation. May whoever sits here know they are valued." Walter read it, nodded approval. "That's good. Real good." "Think we'll still be doing this when you're 80? Eli asked. Walter picked up his grandfather's hammer, felt its familiar weight. "Son, I plan to be doing this when I'm 90. He meant it. Because Walter Jennings had learned what so few discover. Miracles don't always arrive dressed in robes and halos. Sometimes they knock on your door at 19 years old, asking for help with broken cribs. Sometimes they arrive in the simple words, "I can't do this alone." Sometimes salvation comes disguised as purpose. And sometimes the old carpenter discovers that the best thing he ever built was himself. All over again. This story reminds us that purpose doesn't retire when we do. Sometimes the knock that changes everything comes when we've given up hope. Walter thought he was too old, too broken, too irrelevant, until one stranger reminded him that being needed is the cure for feeling invisible. So ask yourself, what gift are you hiding because you think it doesn't matter anymore? Who might be waiting for you to say yes? Drop the word hope in the comments if this story touched you. Tell me your city. Your story might inspire someone there. Subscribe for more stories that prove miracles wear human faces. And remember, your next chapter might be just one knock away.